do you feel free now?
Yes, in the sense that, I explore that question of what does it mean to be free in the book? I mean, it's the question that's really haunted my entire adult life after having my freedom and my identity and my sense of control over my own life just totally stripped away very, very quickly. Um, and I think that one of the great lessons that I take away in this book is, first of all, this idea that being totally free, the way that we like to think we are in our state of innocence, is actually an illusion, that we are always sort of bound by the limitations of our existence, be they internal and external, you know, limitations or just conditions. You might even call them just this is the condition of my life. And I think the trick to recognizing your freedom is the first step to that is accepting what you cannot control, just the conditions of your existence. And once you accept them, you can start to recognize where your freedom of movement, your freedom of agency exists. And you stop holding yourself back when you're expecting the world to be other than what it is. So, yes, I would say I've realized that. And as a result of that, I feel like I am free to move through the conditions of my life and to live the best life that I can under those conditions.
Right. And you write in the book that you do have this feeling that you're carrying around the feeling that the abyss is nearby and that there is some comfort in that. Could you explain that?
Yes. So, the feeling of freedom for me does not come with this a state of weightlessness. It's not a lightness of being that I carry. I carry an incredible heaviness of being. And part of that is because in my most desperate moments, I have I have stared into the deepest of darknesses, including the idea of my own death and the idea of taking my own life. And as a result of that, I I am very conscious that my life, that every day that I'm experiencing and I am a conscious being in this world, I am choosing to do that. This is not something to take for granted. And at any point, technically, it's on the table to not exist and to not do any of this, to just not accept any of the conditions that are in front of me. And knowing, just really, really knowing that, having imagined, having gone through the motions of suicidal ideation, like, sorry, trigger warning, I have become more intentional in the fact of life and the fact of choosing to live. And as a result of that, I can carry with me so much of the heaviness that comes with being me. And I think that that is a thing that everyone carries. I think that everyone in their life accumulates trauma and responsibility and that become it can feel like a deep burden and it can make us feel very resentful of the life that we have and the conditions of our life. And so I guess what I would say is that as someone who has stared into the abyss, I have come to see the burdens of my life also with a sense of gratitude, that I'm grateful that I have adversaries. I am grateful that I have grief because it puts into perspective the grand scheme of life, which is a blessing and a privilege.
The adversaries are presumably people that would still maintain that you're guilty.
Yeah, absolutely. There are those. But I would say I would consider myself an adversary of myself. Like, one of my big important goals in writing this book was to talk not just about my successes, but my failures, the mistakes that I made, the sort of consequence of having been a very young, naive person who was then plunged into a very traumatic event and came out of it in a way flailing, just like trying to grapple onto anything and anyone that would re-give me a sense of my identity and stability. And sometimes I grappled onto the wrong things and I made mistakes, and I learned from them. And so I am grateful. I'm both grateful um and sad for my younger self who had to go through the challenges that she went through, because I think they were outsize for her. They were excessive. Um, and I think that I have also developed a very interesting relationship with the idea of an adversary. One of these through lines in the book is my relationship with my prosecutor, and he is we have a very complicated relationship, I think, in part because he's a very complicated person. And having put myself in a position to witness him in all of his contradictions, um, I I have learned to understand what an adversary is in a very different way than I think the standard person might encounter an adversary as simply an obstacle, as simply a malevolent force in their life. I would argue that that is not who my prosecutor is to me anymore. Some people say to me, "Is he your friend?" And I don't really know how to answer that question, because yes, and he is my friend and he is my adversary.
Mm.
He is my perpetrator, and he is someone who cares about me. Um, and I think that that is more true than people would like to admit, that in the reality of when human beings commit harm against other human beings, it's not this black and white story typically of just one raging psychopath, going after an innocent person. Like, oftentimes it's way more complicated than that. And which isn't to deny that there aren't psychopaths who just, murder people out there. Like, that is absolutely a thing. But I think the vast majority of us are not going to encounter that kind of harm. Instead, we're going to experience the kind of harm that comes from a person that we might have a relationship with, or we might come to have a relationship with, and we have to reconcile with that. And so I put myself in a position of having a relationship with my adversary because I wanted to understand why he hurt me. And an unexpected consequence of putting myself in that position was that the term adversary became complicated by other, feelings and interactions with this fully fleshed out human being.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the most powerful sort of passages of the book when you meet him it sounded like an incredible afternoon.
I
But
mean, I'm so glad you feel that way, because a lot of people have read the book and have come out feeling like my mom, who is the other like big through line character in the book. And I think that she speaks for the other side of the audience who is going to say, what the crap? How could you? Do you have Stockholm syndrome? Like, what is wrong with you? Too
mm,
little, too late. Like, what did you accomplish? And I even, when I wrote this manuscript originally the first time, I shared it with, a lot of my friends and even my agents. And a lot of people were like, I don't know. I feel like, what's the story here? Because he didn't give you the fairy tale ending that you deserve. And I was like, well, that's only if you think the only kind of ending that is worthwhile is a fairy tale ending. And instead, I think my ending is way more interesting than a fairy tale ending, because it's real and it is an accomplishment, right? Like, I didn't just arrive at the end and it petered out and I was like, well, I guess I have to write another book now. Like, I didn't like I came out of that experience feeling like, "Oh my God, I know something now about myself and about the world that I didn't know before, and I want to share that." Like, that really was the impetus to writing this book, was sort of going back in time and tracing my steps to how do I arrived at this moment, that is that culmination in the book of all of this effort and all of this pain and all of this searching, this internal and external searching.
I mean, the vast majority of people I would suggest would have the same reaction as that your mum did, I think.
I mean,
Uh,
maybe, I don't know. I feel like a lot of people who have read the book and reached out to me have told me the opposite, that they felt really, really seen and really empowered and really provoked into a new state of thinking about their life as a result of reading the book. And so I feel really gratified in that. I think we're tempted to think that we need everything to be okay for it to be okay. And that's simply not the case. And I think in terms of like people who are really hurting, who have been really hurt in the world, it's important to know that everything doesn't need to be fixed for you to be good, for you to be better than good, for you to be your best self. And I feel like I just proved that to myself, and as a result was able to just share my experience with others and hopefully encourage people to see themselves in me. And which isn't to say that I don't think everyone should do the exact same things that I did, right? Like I don't think that everyone should confront the person who harmed them, particularly in the way that I did. Although I do think that there is a way to do that that doesn't involve um, like tolerating or allowing, like saying that the bad thing didn't happen. Like I think a lot of people think for me to have a relationship with my prosecutor, that means I just have to cut him some slack and let him off the hook for what he did. And I'm here to say and prove that that's not the case. I very much have a relationship with my prosecutor where I do not let him off the hook.
hmm.
But I also I don't let him off the hook, and I embrace his humanity and am able to see him for whatever good intentions he might have had, even in the midst of committing grievous harm. And I think that he really did not expect that from me. He was in the world of like fairy tales and black and white, and you're on this side, you're on that side. And I just completely swept that aside and made my own path that was not an adversarial path. And it developed into this very rich and complicated relationship that was very meaningful to me, but I was very surprised to find was even more meaningful to him.
Do you think deep down he knows that he was wrong, even though he doesn't admit it? Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's you sort of get that sense in the way you describe how he behaves. But I mean the sort of looking back at the trial where he detailed in you talk about fairy tales, he certainly seems to have a really vivid imagination, really minute detail. He sort of imagined what he thinks happened. It
Yeah.
must be,
And
it must be
I
so hard for you to sort of forgive that.
um yeah, it is hard. It is hard. It's really hard. And I really struggle with a lot of anger and and you know going back to that idea of like, does he know what he did? Like, I think the thing that's most interesting about these cases is that it's not so much do they believe in this, or does he believe that I was involved in this crime or not. I think the more interesting fact is he believes in himself. He believes that he is a good person, that he is a logical person, and that he conducted an investigation according to his instincts and intuitions and his logical reasoning. Those things can all be true. And at the same time, he could be wrong. And he's admitted that as much to me. He has said, like, I did what I thought was right, and I could have been wrong.
Hmm.
At the same time, he doesn't just go back and say, I was wrong about everything, right? Like he still is in this space of evolving in his understanding of the specific details about this case. But in terms of him being able to vocalize that he believes in himself and also was capable of making mistakes is what I think is a huge step in just growth in him as a human being as well, considering that he was, trained and grew up and spent his entire life in an adversarial system that disincentivizes any kind of admission of even potential mistakes or wrongdoing. So, like, I have to give him credit where credit's due. He did not have to meet with me, and he did not have to say some of the things that he has said to me and admitted to me, even if he hasn't said all of the things and admitted all of the things to me and to the world that I would like him to. And
Right.
that's because that's just not where he's at. And I can accept that as a condition of my existence and still go about my life not feeling inhibited by that.
Do you have any contact at all with the Kercher family?
I don't. And it's really unfortunate because I have reached out in the past. And I actually was just going through paperwork this morning that I keep unearthing, letters between me and my mom that she, finds in a box that she tucked away under a bed somewhere. And she brings them back to me because I wrote hundreds of letters to my mom and to my family members. And in one of them was the draft of my first letter that I sent to the Kercher family that I sent through their attorney, which I have no idea if he even actually passed it on to them. And I think that's been a really difficult part of this is I've never had any direct contact with them. I've always attempted to communicate with them through either their attorney who hates me or through a journalist who I knew was in contact with them. And I have no even confirmation that they even know that I have ever attempted to contact them. I have no idea if they've ever heard an interview that I did. I don't know. But I feel like my best to put it out there that I want to speak with them, while at the same time really being careful to not say, you have to speak to me, because they don't, right? Like, they went through a traumatic experience and they don't owe me anything, right? I went through also a traumatic experience on the heels of their traumatic experience. We experienced something very traumatic together. It would be very nice and I think very healing for us to communicate about that. But, like, when it all comes down to it, their grief is real and all encompassing. And my feelings about my own grief are not, don't demand anything of them. I just want them to know that I do want to talk to them and I do want to reconcile with them, because it's horrible that, you know, I was friends with this girl. She was my roommate. She was a year older than me and, like, looked out for me. And I've never got to share any of those memories of her with them. And I don't even know if they would be capable of receiving them, depending upon how they still feel about the case. I don't know. And, the years have gone by. Both of her parents have passed. So the only people who remain in her life that I even know of are her siblings. And again, I don't know what they think of me and what they think of the case, and that would completely color anything that I could possibly say to them. So it's also a little bit debilitating on my part, because I feel like nothing I could ever say could satisfy them as long as they think that I had something to do with Meredith's death or know something about it that I'm not telling. And, like, I don't know what to do or what to say, except that I've already said everything that I know. Everything that I know about what happened to Meredith, I have already said. And unfortunately, I don't know a lot. I know what I learned about in the trial. I know what I came home to and what I found. That's all I know. And I don't know if that would satisfy them.
You think that they still think that, that you've withheld something or
I do. And I think that the reason I think that is also because that's kind of what the Italian justice system ultimately decided. Is the Italian justice system acquitted me of these horrific charges, but still left open the idea that I was present when this crime occurred. that I was physically present in the house when Meredith was being murdered. And therefore, I know exactly what happened. And if I know exactly what happened and I'm not telling, that means that I'm withholding the truth from them. And it's simply not true. But that's because the Italian justice system to this day has not done justice in this case and actually recognized the like the truth of what really happened in its official documentation of the case.
What did you write in that letter?
Gosh, I'm really tempted to go and grab it. It's upstairs, but it was essentially talking to them about how I'm so sorry for everything that they've gone through, and that I I recognize, their pain, and that pain is never going to go away. And again, this same thing that I'm saying to you now, which was like I want to share with you my like everything that I know, because you deserve that from me. Everything that I know, I want to tell you, including all of these amazing, beautiful memories that I have of your sister. And I would love to have the opportunity to grieve with you. So I'm here waiting if you want that. And that's essentially what I wrote.
Right. And do you still often think of Meredith?
I do. Yeah. And not just because my identity has become all wrapped up in, the idea of her death. Like I live with this legacy of this case on my shoulders. I think much more so than anyone else in the case. Much more so than the actual murderer, that's for sure. And um, and so I recognize that I'm carrying that legacy of her as well. But also just I feel there's this chapter in the book where I talk about how I feel like she and I are two sides of the same coin, in that we were both young women who went to go study abroad and, live our best lives, and fate flipped a coin and only one of us got to survive the experience and go home. And that was me. And so recognizing how close it got to me dying, or to things just being like it could have gone the other way and I could have been home. Like who knows what could have happened. And so I'm very aware that the fact that I get to go on with my life and have a family and have children is this privilege to live that was almost stolen from me, and that was certainly stolen from her. And so I'm very, if this whole one of those things that I've talked about is, it's very few people have ever really said to me like, I'm so sorry for this traumatic thing that happened to you. You lost a friend in a really traumatic way. And it's like, thank you for recognizing that, because even if I hadn't gone through, prison and global vilification, I still would have lost a friend in a really brutal and unexpected way at a young and like defining age. And I also carry that with me for the rest of my life.
Is there one, I mean, is there one sort of single moment or period that you would describe as your sort of lowest moment? I mean, you had the the the, the endless court battles, you had the initial treatment by the police and their tactics, and then the 4 years in prison. Does one sort of particular moment stand out as the sort of the lowest point?
So that's a really interesting way to frame it, because there's low as in that feeling of just utter dread at existence, but then there's scary. And I would say that if I had to describe a moment that haunts me the most, it would be the scariest moment and not necessarily the lowest. Because the lowest point for me was when I was convicted and sentenced to 26 years, and everything that I thought was true about the criminal justice system and truth beyond a reasonable doubt and that my innocence would be recognized, all of that, just the rug was pulled out from underneath me and I was falling. Like that was when I felt like, oh my God, the truth doesn't matter. My life doesn't matter. Like all of this, everything that I thought that I could count on is collapsing. That was a low point. But like embedded in that low point was also a a sort of a realizing, a clarity, a sort of a clarity. I almost had like a kind of enlightened experience because it was so traumatic. Like I was just like, oh my God, this is it. This is my life. Like this is it. This moment right here, this is my life. And like that clarity was, it wasn't exactly happy per se, but it was, I think that it is always a good feeling to feel clarity about your existence. I think that's a comforting, there's no confusion. For me, the scariest moment was one that was absolutely confused and and it was during my interrogation. So, you know, I'm being interrogated, I'm being yelled at by police officers, I'm being slapped in the back of the head, I'm being lied to, and this is all overnight. I'm being, you know, I'm sleep deprived. I've already been answering the same questions over and over and over for days on end, and I was led to believe by the police who were lying to me that I had witnessed what happened to Meredith and then had repressed these traumatic memories. So I could not actually remember it, but they insisted that that was exactly what had happened and that I needed to remember who the murderer was or I would never see my family again. And so being put in that impossible position of being told, we know you know who'd committed this crime, and being unable to deliver. Like I did not know. And I was so terrified because I was starting to believe them. I was like, uh, you know, like if there's so many authority figures who are screaming at you and treating you a certain way, like I don't know, the maybe the sort of way I was raised and the fact that I'm more of a people pleaser than like a confrontational person, like I just absorbed all of those lies, that gaslighting that was happening to me and calling my own sanity into question. And that moment when I just did not know anymore what was the truth. And I
Hmm.
completely folded and collapsed and just did not like, I just could, that was the worst moment and is a moment that continues to haunt me to this day, particularly because so many of those tactics that the police used against me are considered legal. Like that, you know, they're not allowed to slap me, right? So, of course, they've denied doing anything like that. But like yelling at me, lying to me, gaslighting me, these are all tools that are in a police officer's, you know, pocket. They can pull those out at any time on an you know, an unsuspecting innocent person and completely destroy their sanity without any repercussions. And like the when I've kind of like came out of that and came out of this experience and learned that that kind of treatment of people who are being questioned is legal, I'm just haunted by that. Like that absolutely should not be okay. And yet, you know, when I go and do criminal justice advocacy, I meet so much resistance from police officers who really do not want to let go of these methods because they're incredibly effective at breaking people. The problem is they're too effective at breaking people. They break innocent and guilty people alike, and they do not ultimately result in information that is going to be useful for an investigation because you can get anybody to say anything. And trying to point that out to them is so hard because they truly believe, so many people truly believe that they only ever interrogate guilty people, that they know before they have the evidence who the guilty person is, and they just need to get them to admit it. And like that's where we get into that complicated territory, right? Like people who are trained to do this and believe in themselves and believe they are doing the right thing are committing harms without even realizing it, and they feel justified to do it. That's that's where this all gets very complicated and interesting.
It's terrifying. Yeah, I mean that sort of feeling of helplessness that you must have felt, particularly with, police that you should be able to trust and to protect you. Um,
Exactly. I called the
how
police because my house had been broken into, fully expecting to be protected and assisted by the police, and I was betrayed. And I don't think any victim, indirect victim of violent crime should ever feel that way.
At that moment, how did you pick yourself up?
At that moment after my interrogation,
Hmm.
I didn't. I feel like I was basically dragged out of that police station and plopped into a prison cell. And I spent years hating myself, blaming myself for that interrogation, not realizing what ultimately had taken place. And because I also just didn't know. I'd never been gaslit and abused and psychologically tortured before. I didn't know. It was in the same way that, like, people who are in abusive relationships where they're coercively controlled by their partners don't realize it in the moment, but only once they're out of it do they realize, oh my God, I had zero agency in this relationship and I was completely and utterly manipulated constantly. Like, it was only once I got out of it and someone pointed it out to me that I realized what had really happened. And I think that this is where I think there's opportunity for people in the victims' rights movement to really, join hands with people in the criminal justice reform movement, where typically there has been, like, historically, there's been opposition between these two groups because the same kind of tactics that abusers use on their victims, police officers are using on people they suspect of crimes. And that is just not okay. Um, and I think we can all learn from each other because there has been significant research into these kinds of behaviors and how they inflict harm on innocent people.
How important was your mum in getting you through those those dark times?
Yeah, so my mom is the other really big, through line relationship in the book. It's really like my mom and Mignini in this parallel track. And my mom has always been, my biggest fan, my greatest supporter, just the person who always, in all instances, put me and my sister first, right? And so I never at any point in my upbringing questioned the value of my life. My mom made it very, very viscerally clear that I mattered and that I was loved. And I think that having that with me as I went through this experience carried me. It was the safe, like, it was the emotional safety net that I could always rely on. And I was very fortunate. I realized how fortunate, like, I grew up thinking that that was just the normal course of things, that everybody had that. But then I entered into prison and everybody around me had much more complicated relationships with their mothers or their parents or their families. And I realized how lucky I was. And and of all the things that distinguished me from my peers in the prison, it wasn't just my innocence, it was the fact that I was loved, just deeply and unconditionally and always loved. And I think that just deep visceral knowledge is one of the most important things that another human being can give another human being and sets them up for success in life. And so I think that any kind of rehabilitation that I have been able to handle ultimately stems from that deep seated belief that my mother instilled in me that I mattered. And so I continue to defend myself even when people to this day say that I don't matter, or that what happened to me doesn't matter, or that I should just shut up and disappear. Like, I know that they're wrong. And that's in large part due to my mom.
And you wrote to each other all the time, right? And when you were in prison.
Yeah, yep. And I always got letters from her on like school. She worked in elementary school, so like elementary school stationery that had like, bugs crawling on the sides or whatever. And yeah, I mean, what do you write about for 4 years? What do you talk about? I mean, the major thing that she wanted to convey to me was that I was still a part of her life, that I still belonged where she was. And so like one of the best gifts that she gave me, and all of my friends gave me when I was in prison, was just like it was almost like a diary entry of their like description of their day, what they had for lunch, who they talked to, just like really bringing me into their presence and what was happening in their life. And I did my best to do the same, and sometimes that was good and sometimes it wasn't, because I was on a very different path than they were. And what their lives looked like and what my life looked like, just it became so apparent over time, just how, regardless of how much we were reaching out to each other, the circumstances of our lives were pulling us apart. It was impacting the way that I was reacting. It impacted what I read, it impacted how I spent my time, it impacted my relationships. Like I could only see a few people. Like not everybody who I knew could come and visit me. Like it was only certain family members I saw. You know, there were family members of mine who I saw on a every other day basis. Like I helped, babysit and raise my cousins. I saw them once in 4 years while I was in prison. And, there was no Zoom back then. I had one 10-minute phone call a week. Like this was and I got to the point where I spent a lot of time just staring at 2D images of my friends, and just so I could feel like they were real. Because after a certain point, like your whole world feels like it is only as big as the prison that you move around in. And it's really hard. And the conditions of those spaces lead to a very different lifestyle and a very different psychology. My mom was really fixated on the idea that of just, we got to save Amanda, we have to prove her innocent, we have to get her out of there. And after my, conviction, I was facing a 26-year sentence, and I was asking myself, well, what if I don't get out? What if this is it? How do I make this worth living? How do, what are the things that I have to grieve? Like the ability to have a family, to have a career, to have children, to have a meaningful romantic relationship. All of those things gone. What is left? What opportunities are there here? And I was able to find certain fulfilling things like becoming a translator for people. Great. Um, but it wasn't what my mom was hoping for me. And so sometimes when I talked about things that I felt were me advancing, me living as much as the best life that I possibly could within the conditions of the environment, my mom really resisted that and wanted me to keep imagining living the life outside with her. And I couldn't, because that was me just waiting to live.
And what impact did that time and everything that happened to you have on your mum?
That's a great question that I wish more people would ask her. Um, I mean, what I can say, and I talk about this in the book, is I became a mom over the course of, these years and this journey to, reconcile with my prosecutor. And in the moment of becoming a mom, I, gave birth to my daughter, and she was screaming in pain, and they laid her on my chest, and I was overwhelmed by just utter unconditional love for this human being that I just met. and also overwhelmed by the realization that I couldn't take her pain away from her. That like I would have given anything for to be able to take her pain and put it on myself, and I couldn't. And so the first words that I sputtered out of my mouth that just came out without me thinking were, "I'm sorry." And my mom is there in the room for me, cheering us on, so happy. And I'm just immediately pivot and go, oh my God, this is what my mom felt the entire time that I was in prison. That helplessness, that feeling of wishing that she could take everything bad happening to me and take it on herself and not being able to. I don't know how my mom did it, but I did feel in that moment. And to this day, I feel like what my mom went through was worse than what I did, because there's what an existential crisis that the one, the person that you love most in the world is going through something so painful and you can do nothing, nothing to stop it.
Mm. And do you think your mum and your stepfather have separated? Is that right?
That is right.
Do you think that that is, obviously the years of strain of what happened with you was a factor in that, or
It was a huge factor. Yeah. The just the strain on the family, the needing to everyone's sort of lives became about saving Amanda. Everybody's dreams get put on hold. Um, and I think another factor was that my stepdad was really, heroic in being willing to spend large amounts of time alone in Italy in order to visit me once a week for an hour at a time. Not everyone else in my family had that flexibility in their work. He could work remotely before that was a thing. And so he spent more time, my stepdad spent more time in Italy visiting me than any other family member. And as a result of that, my mom and him spent 4 years as ships in the night.
mm,
And I think that also put a strain on their relationship. And so a combination of all of those factors led to them separating, and I deeply regret that. I mean, I think that they made the choices that they needed to make at the time, but like if I could go back in time and have that not happen so that they could actually have a normal relationship, like of course. um so everyone, this doesn't just impact the one person who goes to prison. It impacts everyone around them who cares about them, who is sacrificing and putting themselves and their own lives on hold for the sake of another. That that has a lasting impact and lasting consequences.
yeah. Um, and you've got a TV show coming out.
Yes, yes, it's very exciting. It's really good, and I'm really proud of it, and I'm really excited for people to see it. It's going to be on Hulu. It's coming out at the end of the summer, which is really fast. It's coming up really fast, and I'm just working with just some so incredibly talented and smart and caring people, and I feel really, really lucky.
And what can we expect from the show?
Well, you can expect, I think what you'll see is it's very much in my perspective. So when it's in my perspective, that means that it's not a black and white story full of heroes and villains. It's very, very complicated. It is very human. It is very compassionate. And at the same time, it is the worst experience of my life, you know, through my eyes and through the eyes of the people who experience their own worst experiences of their lives all at the same time. And so it is very intense. Let's just say that it's very intense. And so I think that what I hope is that people will come away from the show really understanding criminal justice systems better, interrogation rooms better, um, but even just like human dynamics better, which I think we're doing a really smart and compassionate job. And I think we're trying to shed light on some issues that you don't normally see in true crime. And we're trying to do it in a way that it's not just, you know, true crime horror porn. It is absolutely like a very thoughtful and intentional piece that is doing service. And I feel very proud of it. So I'm look forward to you seeing it.
Great. And I read somewhere the you mentioned the Kercher family's lawyer. He gave quite a forthright statement about the TV show, suggesting, effectively accusing you of profiting from the tragedy. What's your response to that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, his take on anything that I've ever done and any public sentiment I've ever said, any tweet that I've ever written, like anything pertaining to me, he has always condemned because he condemns me. He condemns me as an offense to Meredith's memory, and that is because he is a very confused and short-sighted and adversarial person who also happens to be a hypocrite because, he talks about how me talking about the case dredges up things for the Kercher family, but he doesn't at all think that that applies to himself when he talks about the case or when he writes a book about the case. So I think that he's simply being, a short-sighted, adversarial, small-minded human being. And I'm not really bothered by him, um, because I don't think that he ever has been fair towards me. Um, I do hope that the Kercher family will see the show. I hope that they'll read my book because I think that it will perhaps give them some insights into what happened that will be generative and helpful for them, potentially even healing. And and I hope that they will recognize the value in my attempt at revealing the truth of what happened to Meredith in my, revealing the truth of what happened to me.
Do you regret anything?
Um, I just certainly have made mistakes in my life, and as a young person who is navigating this very, very overwhelming situation. Um, but I feel like the things that I regret are not what a lot of people think that I should regret, right? Like a lot of people point to my behavior in the very early days of the crime, being discovered and those 5 days between discovering what, Meredith's body to me being arrested. And I look back on that time and I don't regret anything because as far as I knew up to that point in my life as a 20-year-old girl, I was doing everything right. I came home, discovered a crime scene, called the police. I then spent the next 5 days doing what the police told me to do. And so I, you know, no one, I challenge anyone to have given me any piece of advice that they would give a 20-year-old, if not the get yourself a lawyer, right? Like that's the one piece of advice that no one really thought to give me because, you know, my family and I thought my innocence was obvious and no one ever suspected that I would be suspected. Like it just was just so beyond conceiving that someone would accuse me of having participated in this crime that like I never at any point thought that only when I was in my interrogation, everyone's yelling at me and screaming at me, did I ask, should I have a lawyer right now? And they were like, not if you want to cooperate with us. And it's just like that I regret not insisting that I needed a lawyer,
Mm.
not just, but I didn't know. I didn't know what I was allowed. I didn't know, like they say, to this day, they say, oh, well, you were allowed to walk out of that room at any point. And it's like, I did not feel that way. I felt like you closed the door and had me surrounded, and I did not have the right to leave the room. And so, Like when the principal calls you into his office, you're not just allowed to walk out and tell him to go, screw himself. Like that I didn't know. And so I think that in the many ways that we at, you know, 35 and 40 years old wish that we could live our 20s as with our 35 and 40-year-old brains and all the things that we know, of course. And I feel like if I had my brain today, that this would not have happened. Um, but do I like hold it against my 20-year-old self? No. No, I
Yeah.
just feel sad for her.
Yeah, I mean, one of the sort of defining images in the early days was the picture of you and Rafaela comforting each other, um, near the house, and the way that
Yeah.
that was depicted in the British tabloid press was sort of quite a big moment.
Yes. Yeah, that 3-second clip that ended up becoming the most rewatched 3-second clip of my life of being comforted by my boyfriend. Again, I don't regret, being comforted by my boyfriend in that very scary and confusing moment. Um, I think other people should regret how they reacted to it.
Yeah. And after, everything that you've gone through, being acquitted twice, and everything that we now know about Rudy Gaudet, what would you say to people who would still maintain that you're guilty or had an involvement in what happened to Meredith?
They're wrong. But I'm not in the business of arguing with people about my innocence anymore. I don't need to convince somebody who doesn't want to be convinced. I think that anybody who continues to hold on to the idea that I was involved in Meredith's death just doesn't want me to be innocent. And
Hmm.
I'm not interested in having, useless conversations with people who don't really want to give me the benefit of the doubt and to be fair. So, yeah, that's on them. And I guess I would just ask them why they feel they need me to be innocent or, like or guilty or whatever, like they they have an idea in their mind about who I am and they've projected their idea onto me. I mean, even now, just the fact that I say, like, said innocent or guilty, like, people will read into whatever I say and derive what they want from that. And I just have to be at peace with people really wanting to read whatever they want to read out of anything.
Have you thought your children are quite young, right? Have you thought yet about in years to come how you're going to sit them down and try and make some sort of sense for them of this, traumatic episode in your life?
Sure, absolutely. Especially because I believe in being transparent. As a parent, I believe that like one of the big greatest gifts that we can give to our children, besides that unconditional love and value in them as human beings, is ourselves, is the journey of life that we have already been on and the lessons that we have derived from it. And being really open and willing to be vulnerable with our children and to talk about the ways that we've been hurt or made mistakes. And so, already I tend to take the position I should follow my children's lead. And my daughter, who is 3 years old, is very, very perceptive. And she knows, I've taken her to Italy. We've gone back, and she asks questions and I tell her age appropriate, honest answers. And we have already talked about how mommy lost a friend in Italy and how mommy spent time in jail in Italy and how people said really horrible and cruel things about mommy that weren't true. And I think one of the sort of unexpected consequences of that is she treats it a little bit like a fairy tale. Like she wants me to tell her the story of it like it's a fairy tale. And sometimes she'll want to play the story of when mommy goes to Italy and she'll want to pretend to be me in a jail cell like and so her sort of innocence and openness to the story is really interesting. It's another way of experiencing it, um, and processing it that I wasn't expecting. And so I don't know, I'm just really grateful for it. And I feel really confident that I can tell her a story that isn't just about me being a victim, but it is me being a human being who was victimized and then survived and was able to go on and make the best of a very bad situation.